Hi everyone, thank you for bearing with us. I'm going to try to keep this to 10 minutes, so hopefully everyone can keep focused and all that. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Clare Super. I'm a second-year biological anthropology student, and I've been interested in ecology, environmental issues surrounding climate change, and the intersection of people and their environments for a long time. I was very heavily affected by wildfire when I attended undergrad in western Montana, as fire season has gotten noticeably worse as compared to my childhood. So it makes sense that this project concerns endeavors to capture the embodiment of climate change, disaster-disrupted landscapes, and relief work in the bodies of wildland firefighters by capturing differential abilities to cope with extreme seasonal variation in physiological and psychological stress associated with wildland firefighting. So here's kind of an outline of what I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over the major theoretical themes, the research design of my project, and why I think it's an important project that needs to be done specifically by me. Okay, so many people are looking into the physical embodiment of wildland firefighting by examining specific short-term consequences of things like smoke inhalation, high temperature adaptation, and water loss. As an anthropologist, I'm interested in longer-term consequences like shifts in metabolism and weight that may result from non-specific but a potent consequence of disaster relief work, which is seasonal chronic stress. As an anthropologist, I'm also positioned to interact with some of the important themes of biosocial theorization of disaster, and these include biological embodiment, resilience, vulnerability, and stress. Okay, so starting with biological embodiment. Since the body has come into focus throughout anthropology, embodiment has been utilized theoretically in several ways, from Bourdieu's habitus to Shepherd-Hugh's mindful body. I will use a biocultural and biosocial theoretical approach for this project. In this, embodiment will be utilized theoretically as the biophysical manifestation of the relationship between affective experience, access to multimodal resources, often due to power dynamics, social space, and external environment. So an example of this that I kind of have a graphic of there is a shift in microbiome due to colonially instituted shifts in diet. So that kind of goes with Francisco's project a little bit. Okay, so another major theory that I will intersect with is vulnerability. Theorizations concerning climate change often center around the concept of vulnerability and, for example, how systematic underinvestment in critical infrastructure, services, and resources between populations has proven to create unevenness and vulnerability to disaster across axes of social difference, such as race, class, ethnicity, and gender. Most of these theories focus on residence, which is kind of what this major model of vulnerability and climate change focuses on, but my project will focus on the bodies of the more mobile disaster relief firefighter, who I project will nonetheless carry uneven vulnerability to climate-disrupted environments by having differential social and biological histories and differential off-season environments. Resilience theory, in its various forms, can help explain why differential vulnerability from background may translate into a predisposition for differential biological embodiment of wildland firefighting activity through concepts such as allostatic load, which is what is depicted here. This kind of dated model of allostatic load conceives that chronically activated nervous, endocrine, and immunological systems in response to stress actually shift the baseline, so you can see from here to here, actually shift their baselines or homeostatic points and lead to overactivation and failure to shut off, resulting in predisposition for heart disease, inflammation, and decreased sensitivity to insulin. So you can see here why I'm projecting there might be metabolic shifts. It these same processes are at play for wildland firefighters during the chronically stressful fire season. That differential resilience after season stems, in part, from this pre-exposure to chronic stress in vulnerable participants. Okay, so the population of study, wildland firefighters, represent this ideal population with which to study. They experience extreme seasonal multi-stress, which is just, I'm conceiving, psychological and physiological stress during fire season. Then they have 6 to 7 months of intermission during the off-season. So when they're on duty and training, their living conditions for wildland firefighters, it's largely uniform. Crews are eating, working, and resting together. Wildland forest fires also represent this rising biological cost of climate change-induced disasters, as fires are now burning more land for longer fire seasons with more severity. Wildland firefighters come from extremely diverse backgrounds, and this is actually getting more diverse, from college students to, of course, in California, prisoners. This allows the observation of different background effects on resilience. So this is my hypothetical consequences of chronic stress from disaster relief based off the literature I've been interacting with all year. So basically, I think this chronic, seasonally fluctuating stress will lead to the activation of systems like the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which will lead to inflammation and bidirectional signaling between the gut, microbiome, and brain, which will be regulated at neuroendocrine and immune levels. The chronic activation of these systems will lead to short-term microbiome shifts and increased intestinal permeability, and this may all culminate in a shift in metabolic systems, eventually leading to metabolic dysfunction in those most vulnerable to this sort of system happening to them. So my research design will include recruiting persons entering the U.S. Forest Service for the first time for wildland fire careers, as I used to reside in Missoula, Montana, an epicenter of wildland firefighting training, and have many wildland firefighters in my social sphere. I'm in a good position to do this. Baseline biomarkers will be measured, and baseline conditions of participants, such as activity level, social economic status, available social support, and mental state, will be determined through interviews and surveys administered before training. Biomarkers will be surveyed every 3 months during fire season or so. End of season biomarkers will be recorded along with individual experiences of this multi-stress fire environment in an exit survey. Biomarkers will again be measured, and at the end of the 6-month off-season, we will take more surveys recording economic, social, lifestyle, and psychological conditions experienced between fire seasons. So data will be analyzed to distinguish trends. If you are interested in the specific biomarkers I will use, recruitment methods, any of my connections in Missoula, please feel free to ask me during Q&A. I learned some of them from Oregon. Okay, and this will shift the narrative. Okay, so why this matters? Let me back up. Why it matters. It will shift the narrative from the disaster worker as a hero, a voluntary agent of the state-orchestrated expert effort to manage a natural, individually isolated event located outside of regular societal function, which I think is a problematic conceptualization. It shifts the narrative of disasters as natural hazards to disaster as a hazard and a disruption as usual in the lives of these firefighters. Going back to that mushroom book, it outlines the vulnerability, resilience, and liability associated with wildland firefighting beyond injury, as these are kind of hazy at this point, so perhaps it can give those folks some legal recourse as they participate in wildland firefighting. And rather than traveling outside of the US as a classic biocultural anthropologist would to use an other population of probable non-white actors to distinguish biocultural trends to apply at home, I'm using a local, to me, population that in my experience has been at least 50% white, this is changing, but also lower class to distinguish biocultural trends that I hope can actually also be applied outward. So it kind of flips the system, and it can hopefully be be of use to the population of study as well. It also intersects with some bioanthropology and biocultural anthropology conceptions, adaptation and acclimatization. I'd like to thank everybody involved with Colloquium, all of the people who let me bounce ideas off of them all the time that have completely shaped this project. And questions?
Yeah, this is amazing work, and obviously it's super interesting to me because I work on the cognitive operational side of these things. So I'm really interested. I mean, there's definitely an undercutting of mortality in this community. So I think that's one issue that I think would be really important to look at when you, as you do your work. The other issue has to do with climate change, which is something that I think you've kind of separated out from the many factors that are leading to these fires, but also I wonder to what extent you can separate it out as a distinct stressor. I guess your title alluded to that, but I was just, and especially when you talk to the firefighters, because I think there are very different views around this issue.
Yes.
Climate change. So how do you shape the narrative of how you work with them, I guess?
So actually, when I was first labeling this this presentation, I was a little uncomfortable using that, like I was actually capturing the embodiment of climate change because I think of so many factors, as do many of the people I will be interacting with. And you're right, in Montana, there's a lot of talk of fire as like a natural thing and a rejection of climate change as like an instigator of this. However, I think for the political purposes I want this project to take, I need to not try to separate climate change out as a variable. It needs to, obviously it is going to permeate every single other variable surrounding this, and I will make that clear in my actual presentation of the data. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So I love that you're trying to move away from these like very short-term and sort of proximal measurements of stress, right? Like, you sort of take a serum cortisol and then make some huge claim about the kind of stress that results from a really complicated nexus of like social and biological convergences. But I'm wondering how your methods, and I think that you're really smart to reorient towards these like longer term sort of accumulations of embodied stress. But I'm wondering how your methods over the course of a the framework of a doctoral project, right? You're taking biomarkers every 3 months or so in the field. How you're proposing to map or think about the sort of long-term effects, because the temporality of chronic disease is really uncertain and certainly far longer than you're going to be in the field, right? That like the time from exposure to metabolic syndrome is
Definitely
really
not a year. Yeah.
and could be 25 years. And so how are you thinking through these different temporalities of chronic disease as you're like, mapping this particular population and exposure to stress right now?
Right. Excellent question, something I ask myself all the time. We're super limited in our doctoral projects because I can't spend 3 years in the field, or at least I hope I don't have to. And I'm kind of thinking of this as a pilot project for that reason. So basically, I am not looking for the development of metabolic syndrome. I am looking for things that would indicate a predisposition to the development of metabolic syndrome. And I've actually been considering, so I know I said I'm recruiting people who are doing it for the first time. It's quite different generationally because wildland firefighting is changing so rapidly, but I was thinking of doing kind of maybe an older cohort that has been doing this for a while and is like on the cusp of retiring, to see if I can possibly determine maybe a development of this that is farther along from more chronic activation of it. But you're absolutely right. I'm kind of thinking of these in 3 time scales. So I'm doing like inflammation markers that are happening right then, microbiome changes that are happening right then when I'm actually taking the samples. Intestinal permeability tends to be a little bit longer lived, and over time I'm hoping that like the overall metabolic shifts from pre-season to post-season to off-season will be indicative of maybe a predisposition to this developing. But you're right, I will not be able to capture it actually developing. Yeah.
So when you start looking at older populations, it might also be very interesting to add in some anecdotal ethnographic interviews.
Oh yeah.
To get a sense of what people think they're in for, what people halfway through a career have experienced, and what the veterans say, because often there's this sort of social coaching of how you adapt to these stresses. And people are going to be doing things that they may not realize will add to their biological stress over time.
Yep.
So use drugs or alcohol or whatever else they consume when they're living in this high stress environment.
You're absolutely right, and I really think, I mean, I don't have any data yet, but I really think that the reasons that people have for entering wildland firefighting, because some of them are college students trying to make a buck in the off-season, but some of them are doing it for very vehement economic reasons. I think that will have a lot to do with their outcomes, and so I think it's something I really need to talk about. And you're right, that generational, pass down of coping mechanisms or whatever is continuing to happen and is definitely not happening in a positive way, as wildland firefighters have one of the highest rates of suicide, higher than firefighters writ large. So yeah.
And it's definitely not being taught in forestry schools.
Oh, no.
Thank you very much, Claire.